We interrupt this record to bring you a special bulletin. The reports of a flying saucer hovering over the city have been confirmed.
Did you really go out with an alien? Uh-huh. What was it like? Real different.
Becoming Human, a Mork and Mindy podcast. Hey everybody, this is Paula Scheffner with episode 16, Skyflakes Keep Falling on My Head. And it's another episode that does not have Mork's name in the title, although I suppose he could be the My. This episode first aired on February 1st, 1979. The IMDb synopsis is, Exidor loans Mork and Mindy his decrepit cabin in the woods. Meanwhile, Exidor plans to become a rock star so he can obtain the title Emperor of Earth. This was directed by Howard Storm, his 10th of 59 Mork and Mindy episodes. It was written by Dale McRaven and Bruce Johnson, who had written Mork's First Christmas together, and also Dale McRaven wrote the pilot. As the episode opens, Mindy is typing in her living room, and she's reading some of it aloud, like she's thinking through what she's going to say. And it's hard to catch because of the applause as Mork enters from the attic, but it sounds like she's writing something about Mark Twain in 1884. Mork is in his night clothes and he's clutching a green blanket. Mindy is wearing a plaid shirt and it's unbuttoned surprisingly low, although you can't see this in all the shots. Mork says that it seems like there's a lot of work in college, and we find out that she's taking a class with Professor Raymond. So I thought that was nice that we actually hear a little bit about her college courses. He tells her that she won't even notice that he's here, but he sits on the floor and he clutches her leg with both his hands. And of course she wants to work on her paper, but he begs her not to make him leave. He says he'll shovel the dishes and wash the snow. And of course snow will be an important part of this episode, as you can guess from the Skyflakes in the title. He doesn't want to go back upstairs to Vincent Price. Mr. Price was on the TV upstairs in the attic. Mindy suggests Mork turn Vincent off, and Mork says he did, but then it got dark. She can't believe he's afraid of a TV show. He says he didn't get off the egg just yesterday, so variation on he wasn't born yesterday. He says Vincent Price doesn't scare him. It's the ghosts, the swamp, and the dude with his head cut off, carrying his head in his hands. He makes some scary noises. Mindy points out that the movie is on everyone's TV, and Mork says then they're going to need more blankets. He asks why she didn't tell him about ghosts. She says because there's no such thing as ghosts. And Vincent Price is just a man who doesn't live in a swamp. He makes soufflés and he makes art at Sears. So I thought that was a cute little contrast between the image of Vincent Price as the horror movie star and the Vincent Price that we saw in the 70s, who was also an art collector. Mindy again says that there's no such thing as ghosts. So Mork lets go and he stands up and he tries to act very nonchalant. She again says that she wants to finish her report, even though he wants to chat. And he says, how about those basketball players? Those suckers sure are big, aren't they? Mindy tells Mork that after tomorrow they can spend a lot of time together and they can go away somewhere. Right now, she has to finish the report. He says a mind is a terrible thing to waste, which is the United Negro College Fund slogan. Mork again pretends to be cool with all of this, and one of the things he says is that Vincent Price is old, but the attic stairs frighten Mork. He puts the blanket on over his head, and then he carefully goes upstairs. We again get an exterior of the snow-covered Boulder Mall, and we see that Fred is helping a female customer, and meanwhile there are two other customers who are over by the window, and they leave at some point in this scene, and we see them walk by the window, but they don't really do much. But I thought it was nice. They've got 3 customers. They're doing better than they were earlier in the season. A cab driver comes in, and the cab turns out to be for the woman that Fred is helping. So she leaves, and then Mork comes in, and he thinks that the cab driver is a soldier, so he gives him a quarter and tells him that it'll buy him 2.5 dances at the USO. So like a dime a dance thing that I guess he picked up from maybe a 40s movie or something. Mork tells Fred that his, as in Fred's army, is doing a fantastic job. Mork hasn't seen any Necrotons around. So that's the 3rd reference to Necrotons. Whether that's intentional or not, it's building up to when we actually will meet some Necrotons in the next season. Fred says that Mindy isn't here right now. Mork knows that because she stayed up till 5 last night to finish her report. Fred says he's glad she finally finished it. He knows that she's been working hard on it for a long time. Mork thinks that she needs to get away for a couple days' rest. He would like to take her to the Dog Star, Sirius. He says it's incredible to see a whole galaxy fetch. Fred thinks it would be hard to go there and back in just a couple days. Cora enters from the practice room.
Ooh. Well, I've seen it all.
What?
If I should go belly up tomorrow, you can put, "She saw it all," on my tombstone.
What are you talking about?
Well, I've met a man from outer space. That's nothing compared to that student out in back. This bozo looks so weird. He makes Mork look like a Republican.
Whoa, my kind of guy.
Mork wonders if he should observe this man. Cora says somebody should put him under observation. And then Exidor enters from the practice room. His followers crowd around him in the doorway. Mork calls out Exidor, and Exidor, as always, says, "Mork, is that you?" And he parts his crowd, and he calls Mork his old friend. He says Mork has grown. So I guess in Exidor's mind, they've known each other since childhood now, rather than a matter of a few months. Cora can't take any more, and she goes to lunch, even though it's only 9:30 in the morning. She exits out the front door. Mork asks if Exidor remembers Pops. Exidor asks if Fred is Chinese, because Exidor wants a fortune cookie. Fred excuses himself because he has a client, one who wears pants, as opposed to Exidor. Exidor says Fred exudes charm, and in a previous life he was probably a desk cover. Mork asks about the preaching business, but Exidor says that's behind him. He has to look to the future.
Mork, do you have any idea how old I am? Wrong! Next Wednesday afternoon, I'll be 12 years old.
Whoa, you're awfully mature for your age.
Guilt without sex. That's the key.
Exidor says he's too old to preach on street corners. He has to settle down, get a conventional job. So he wants to be Emperor of the Earth.
Exidor the Emperor. There's a nice ring to it. You won't be taking anybody else's job. I know what I can do. I'll help you get elected. I'll be your campaign manager. I know what we'll do. First, we'll get a tub to thump, some babies to kiss. Then we'll get another set of lips so you can talk out of both sides of your mouth.
More!
Yes, I know it'll work. Then we'll get you some hands to shake, some backs to slap. We'll get you some money to pass under a table, a laundry to clean it, a Korean park.
More!
I know we'll build a public image for you. First of all, you have a debate. You'll lose it. You make a comeback. Then you rent a motel. You get Cuban burglars to break into it. Then you have some tapes. 18 minutes will be missing from the tapes.
And that little spiel contains references not only, obviously, to Watergate, like with the 18-minute tape, but also to Koreagate, which happened in 1976 and involved the businessman Tungsan Park. Exidor says that you can't get elected emperor. He asks if Mork knows who runs the world, and before Mork can answer, he says, "Wrong again."
I'll tell you who runs this world. Joe Cocker.
No.
Yes. Mick Jagger.
Him too?
Bette Midler.
I'd serve under her.
Yes.
These rock stars need a leader. That's why Exidor is taking lessons from Mrs. Hudson. Then he's going to go out on tour. He'll start slow at first, just the Superdome, the Garden as in Madison Square Garden in New York, and Woodstock. So, of course, naming a bunch of large venues, although he doesn't mention Candlestick Park.
Jump across the big pond. England. France. I'll take France in 26 days. Then we sweep across Europe. Amplifiers playing. We take Russia, China. We take Africa.
And then Exidor will be emperor. Mork says this sounds reasonable. Exidor tells him that Mork can say he knew Exidor when. He tells Mork that Mork has been a good friend, which is nice, although they haven't consistently gotten along. And he tells Mork that anything that Mork ever wants, he can just come to Exidor. Mork wants just one favor, and he starts to tell him about how Mindy has been working so hard. Exidor interrupts him to scold one of his followers. Mork says it's no big deal. He continues and says that Mindy needs a place to get some rest for a couple days and get away from it all. Exidor asks if they'd rather drive or hike. Mork says hike, so Exidor says he has the perfect place, his summer home. He bought it 4 years ago when he was a doctor. And I don't know if this is like a Reverend Jim kind of situation or if he just hallucinated that he was a doctor. He says it'll be the scenic route. You park your car and then you walk 3 miles to the cabin. And there's a lake that they can walk around, but Exidor, of course, walks across it.
Mindy, you really appreciate that.
An emperor takes care of his subjects. Have a nice vacation.
You have a nice career, but there's one thing. Your plan to become emperor sounds really good, but relies on one thing. You're having talent.
Well, that's never stopped any rock group before. Besides, you've never seen me perform.
Exidor goes to get his axe, which implies that it's a guitar, and he has Mork do an introduction.
Ladies and gentlemen, get ready to get down into a tuck position because it's going to be blown out of your shorts and into your socks. Here he comes, let's all get down, yeah. Get back up again. Here he comes, the Duke of Disco, the Prince of Punk, the King of Rock and Roll, the future Emperor of the world. Let's bring him out here, Exidor and the Prophet.
Exidor comes back with an accordion, and he plays Lady of Spain very badly. And Mork looks dubious about this, but doesn't say anything. Then we get a quick shot of a lake, and Mindy is freezing, and she's also limping. She and Mork have their arms around each other's shoulders, and they're approaching an old wooden cabin. Mindy says that she thought Mork was a trailblazer, and he says he made it from Orc to Earth, but there were no trees. They probably lost the trail when they fell off the cliff. He says that next time she can land on him. Mindy says that her ankle is still sprained, but at least now the toes are facing forward. Mork says tomorrow morning he'll look for the luggage. He hopes it didn't sink. And there was also an avalanche. Mindy stepped on a beaver's tail, and she wonders why it wasn't guarding its darn dam, so it's like she's almost swearing. Mork imitates a beaver screaming. And I just want to mention, Mork is wearing a Hawaiian shirt as one of his layers, which is very Robin Williams. He tells her that she's not going to have a nice weekend if she keeps up these negative thoughts. And then she recounts their misadventures, adding that a mountain goat tumbled by when they were climbing the cliff. Mork says he didn't know goats could scream either. He jokes about losing the key to the cabin, but actually Exidor never gave it to him. She insists that Mork kick the door down. He reluctantly does so, and the wall falls down. He says it looks like it wasn't locked, and he says, "Oh, dopey me." In the next scene, they're in the cabin, and Mork offers to take the top bunk. Mindy says she can't stand the climb, but the bed collapses. Mork says it looks like they're going to be sleeping on Mr. Floor tonight. Mindy wants to go back to the car. Mork points out that they got lost during the daylight, and it'll be worse at night. Besides, the beaver might be looking for them. She says he's right, and they'll have to make the best of it. She leans on the table, and then that collapses. Mork says they can look at the good side. They've got 3 walls and a roof, and then it starts snowing. He says if it wasn't snowing, the stars would be really pretty, which is kind of a nice philosophy, although maybe not at that moment. And then after that quick little scene, they're seated at the table, roasting Vienna sausages on sticks. That was all Exidor had in the cabin, except for a mouse. Mindy says that wasn't a mouse, that was a fuzzy gray avocado. Mork points out that it crawled. Mindy says that the only thing between them and death is this fire. They've got to do something else to keep warm. She notices a trunk. Mork says they couldn't both fit in it, although it'd be fun to try, and he does his bark laugh. Mindy says there might be clothes in there. Mork says, "Who do you think you're talking to? Morko, the pin-headed boy?" Which is a bit offensive, but I don't think Mork knew that. He worries that the avocado may have crawled into the trunk, but there's no trail of guacamole, so they should be safe. They open the trunk, and some of the snow on the lid falls off. Mork finds a book called Confessions of a Schizophrenic by Exidor, as told to Exidor. And the trunk also has his and hers prophet robes. They're made out of flannel, so they put them on over their clothes. Since Mork doesn't have anything to hang from, like he has his bed swing in his attic bedroom, he says he'll have to rough it and sleep horizontally. Mindy says if they fall asleep and the fire goes out, they'll freeze to death. Mork says stiff city, which we heard several episodes back, and that's how he refers to death sometimes. He says they'll stay awake, otherwise they'll be as tight as 2 cubes in a tray, as in ice cubes. He asks Mindy what she does to stay awake when she goes camping. She says roast marshmallows and sing songs. So he sings the Orkin version of 99 bottles of beer, but she says she can't count backwards in Orkin. Then he sings a little bit of a song that he claims is universal, and that's Kumbaya. She says they also used to tell ghost stories by the campfire. He very eagerly wants to do this. She says she doesn't want to scare him, and he says it's better than being a snow cone. So she starts to tell him about a spooky old house way on the top of a hill. And just even from that first part, Mork freaks out, and then he puts the robe on over his head and tells her to continue. And after that scene, we see them huddling. The fire has gone out, and they try to relight it. At first, he can't feel his hands, but then he realizes that's because he's wearing gloves. He has 1 match, and there's only 6 hours left of daylight. He reads the instructions on the matchbook, and he says, "Look, Mindy, you can finish high school in your spare time." And I thought that was a cute little joke. I don't know if they still do this, but on matches they would have, like, draw me and win art lessons, or, just these little deals. He lights the match, but she accidentally blows it out. He cackles hysterically, as the subtitles put it, and then he says that he saw that in a movie once. She suggests he use his finger to light a fire, which I was thinking of as I was watching this, like, why doesn't he just use his finger? But he says that only works when it's above 60 degrees. So a little bit of Orkin biology lesson there. He says they've got to keep moving. They have to get their circulation going. And then he quotes a little bit of Staying Alive, which is the 3rd reference to that song this season. She says she can't, but he tells her to take the bull by the tentacles, which sounds suggestive, but maybe it's just meant to be weird. They don't make it too far before she collapses to the ground, and he gives up too.
Oh, I'm sorry I got you into this. Ever since you met me, I've been getting you into trouble.
Oh, Mork, don't be silly. I wouldn't trade a minute of the time we've spent together. I remember the first time I saw you. You had your suit on backwards.
Remember the first emotion you taught me? Happiness.
I'm just sorry that the last emotion we're sharing is fear.
Yeah. I guess I am afraid. It's nice to be sharing it, though.
I know. Mork, why don't you try to make it down the mountain yourself? I mean, what have you got to lose?
You?
Whenever people have the time, they never get around to saying the things they really want to say. No, I really want you to know how I feel.
You don't have to. I know how you feel.
And I know how you feel.
Mork notices a car pulling up, but Mindy says there'd have to be a road for there to be a car. Then we can hear Exidor singing a bit of Lady of Spain off screen. Mork happily says that it's the future emperor of the world, and he's got Mork's vote. Exidor scolds one of his followers and says to wait in the Jeep because they can't just barge in because Mork and Mindy have a life. He comes over and he asks Mork if they had any trouble getting in. It turns out that Exidor's Jeep is about 30 yards away on a fire road. He was packing to go out on tour, and then he remembered that he hadn't given Mork the key to the cabin. It turns out they could have driven up here, but Mork said he wanted to go for a hike. Exidor asked how they liked the scenic route. He says they don't make cliffs like that anymore. He gives Mork the key and tells them to have a nice weekend. Mork tells Exidor that Mindy hurt her ankle, and he asks Exidor for a ride down the hill. Exidor says sure, if they don't mind the 7 of them jammed into one tiny little Jeep. Mindy says that sounds wonderfully warm. Mork tells her that Exidor's kind of people don't have much warmth, and then he says the word Zippo. Mork apologizes about the cabin, but Exidor, of course, doesn't see anything wrong with it. Mork says that it's a beautiful night. Mindy agrees, and then he carries her in his arms, presumably over to Exidor's Jeep, and then I guess they'll drive down to Mindy's Jeep. In the tag, Mork calls Orson while he's sitting on the couch, and then in his mind, he's at an invisible phone booth, and there's some graffiti that says, "For a good time, call Mary Jo." This week he tells Exidor about the silliness of Earth language, and he calls Orson your acreage. Orson says that Earth language sounds illogical and very confusing, and Mork gives examples about the word run, and I thought he would mix it up a little bit, like talk about running for office. It felt a little stale to me, to be honest. Felt like we'd seen this before, and like the thing about passing or spending the buck. But then he gets to the main point. Orson asks how humans understand each other, and Mork says sometimes they don't. Sometimes they find it difficult to tell each other how they feel about each other, and they wait until it's too late. Mork tells Orson about a strange custom that Earthlings have, where they send flowers after somebody's gone rather than when they're alive. He calls Orson Sir, but he tells him that he never told Orson before that he likes him. And then suddenly a bouquet appears in Mork's hand, and Mork is touched by this. And of course he nibbles on the flowers, so it was nice to get back to Mork eating flowers, which we hadn't seen in a while. He asks Orson, "How did you know I had the munchies?" And so that's cute, although it's possibly a drug reference. So I have to say, although in some ways I vaguely remembered this episode from the time because it had Exidor, because it had them going to the wilderness, and it has a very touching final scene, which I'll get to shortly. Watching it today, it felt a little off. I didn't feel like Exidor's material was as good. There wasn't as much of him and Mork doing back and forth. It was more one talks than the other, and there wasn't that great interaction like the episode where they were both in jail together. The joke about Chinese food, and it's just like, it's not enough to be weird. You have to have it be weird and funny. And Mork and Mindy having such a miserable time, and it wasn't funny. 2 or 3 chuckly lines, but it just didn't really work for me. We don't get much of Cora. She just is stunned by Exidor and she leaves for lunch a few hours early. We get a little bit of Fred, but not so much. Obviously no Eugene. Orson at the end, but even that's not real memorable Orson. But there is that wonderful talk that Mork and Mindy have after they've gone through so much together. They don't know if they're going to survive the night, and so they open up to each other and they reminisce. I thought it was interesting that in the tag, Mork tells Orson that sometimes humans don't know how to tell each other how they feel until it's too late. But he and Mindy didn't say in words how they feel. They just said that they knew how the other felt. I thought that was an odd way to play it, but it was intriguing, especially at this point in the run of this series. And that relates to the heart rating, and I'm going to go with a 2. The hearts measure how shippy Mork and Mindy are together romantically. You could interpret this as 2 friends go away to a remote cabin and have a terrible time, and this would come up on Bosom Buddies in a different way, although the cabin did not collapse on them, but they had no food, or almost no food. But there is an undertone with Mork and Mindy, particularly him carrying her in his arms at the end. And yes, she has a sprained ankle and she's freezing and so on. It did feel more romantic than a lot of first season episodes, even though there's no kiss, there's no dancing, there's no declaration of love or affection per se. But it's there. It's definitely visible. And he apologizes for all the aggravation he's caused her. She doesn't regret a single moment. On a 0 to 4 heart scale, it's a 2 for me. Even if you want to take it platonically, it really is a touching, sweet talk that they have. So it's kind of worth it to go through the rest of the episode. The episode without it, I would say this is a 2 on the egg scale, which is 0 to 4. How well does this represent what I want in a Mork and Mindy episode? So it would have been 2, but because that talk boosts it up, it's a 2.5. I would say if you're looking for the same things I'm looking for, be patient. About 20 minutes in, but you will get that really nice reward. And there was obviously something about the episode that clicked with me back then. So 2.5 eggs, 2 hearts. This has been Paula Schaffner with episode 16, Skyflakes Keep Falling on My Head. Nanu, Nanu.
Raindrops are falling on my head, and just like the guy whose feet are too big for his bed, nothing seems to fit those raindrops are falling on my head, they keep falling. So I just did me some talking to the sun. And I said I didn't like the way he got things done, sleeping on the job. Those raindrops are falling on my head, they keep falling. But there's one thing I know, the blues they send to meet me won't defeat me. It won't